Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I just ask you to sashay to your seats, and I'll speak for a little bit and give people an opportunity to get situated. It's 7, and here we go. I'd like to call the meeting to order at this time. Welcome you all, members of the school board, the police and fire commissions, city staff of all those departments. We appreciate your coming here and assembling for this evening's presentation and discussion. First, so having called the meeting to order at this time, I'd like to ask the city manager and Judy Melanger to proceed with a review of the budget schedule and then a review of budget projections.
Thank you, Your Honor. What we'd like to do tonight is go through a few items. First and foremost, go through the charter requirements, because I think it's important to reiterate what the requirements are. Then we'll go through the budget schedule, which you've all seen. Then we'll go through the FY12 outlook, revenues and expenditures, and then we'll go to guidelines for departments. The first area that I wanted to start with were the charter requirements. All of you have copies of the schedule in front of you and the slides that we're going to be reviewing tonight. The first area, the budget basically starts with the capital improvement program, and the planning board initiates the 6-year capital improvement plan, and many of you have participated already in developing your 6-year capital improvement plan. The planning board subcommittee has already met and reviewed the capital projects. Again, many departments have already gone through this part of the process. Then the planning board holds a public hearing on the CIP and votes to submit the CIP in January. And then the city manager prepares and submits the CIP to the city council, and this is 3 months prior to the final budget submission to the city council. The city council holds a public hearing on the CIP prior to final city council adoption of the CIP, and then the city council adopts the capital improvement plan following public hearing or before the date of budget submission. By charter, the CIP has to be submitted prior to any of the budget being submitted to the city council. So all the references are there for the charter. Anybody can take the opportunity to look those up if they care to, but they're all articulated in the charter. The next part is the budget schedule per the charter requirements. The city manager initiates the budget process with the city departments, and this Wednesday I have a department head meeting, and we're going to be going over what was discussed here this evening. Each department submits their budgets to the city manager in March, and what we try to do, if you've noticed with the schedule, we've tried to be very accommodating to many of the departments, specifically the charter departments. The fire commission, police commission, and the school board holds public hearings prior to the submission of their budget. The city manager submits the proposed budget to the city council 45 days before the start of the fiscal year. That's by charter, so that'd be May 15th would be the latest date that I could get it to the city council, but typically we do it in the middle of April. City council holds a public hearing before the final adoption of the budget. Now, you'll notice in the budget schedule when we get to that the city council about 4 years ago, 5 years maybe, decided that it wanted to have 2 public hearings. So the charter does not restrict to the number of public hearings it can have, but it has to have at least 1 public hearing on the budget. The city council adopts the budget. If the council takes no action on or prior to June 30th, the budget submitted by the city manager shall be deemed to have been adopted by the city by the council. Now, I did hand out a copy of the schedule, so I know it's hard to read up on the screen. But I'll draw your attention probably to the areas that you're most interested in, and those being the first part where we have the public hearing is scheduled for April 11th, 2011. And what we've done is we've reserved the space at the high school and here at City Hall, so we'll make a determination on the location once we get closer to that date. Then on April 20th, we have a work session with the City Council to review the school department budget. April 21st, there's a work session with the City Council to review the municipal budget. The 27th, April 27th, the work session with City Council to review police department budget and fire department budget. And then, as like I said, we have this optional public hearing that the council has decided to have on May 9th, 2011, where they would reopen the public hearing on the proposed FY12 budget. After the public hearing on that date, then the City Council would have a work session to finalize the budget. if it's necessary, or they may have more than one work session depending on what's happening with the budget at that time. And then it is our hope that by June 6, 2011, the City Council would adopt the fiscal year 12 budget. Does anybody have any questions regarding any parts regarding the charter requirements or the budget schedule? I would ask that if any department, police, fire, schools, have any concerns with any of the dates that are listed on the schedule, we will publish the schedule at the end of the week. So please let us know if you need to have any changes to this, so we will make those appropriate changes. This time what I'd like to do is turn the program over to Judy Belanger, our Finance Director, to talk about revenues and expenditures. Judy?
Okay, revenues and expenditures. Just to give you a broad view of what our total revenues are entailed by. These are actual estimates from our FY11 budget, but our total revenue source for the city is our tax base, or as our property taxes, which is about 77.5% of our total revenues. The remaining 22.5% is made up of local fees, license, and permits. Now, our Councilor Noveline Clayburgh is the chair of the fee committee, and this is where fees are established, and the City Council does adopt a fee schedule during the budget process. I believe the fee committee will be meeting in January and February to review some of these fees. These fees make up less than 1% of our total revenues, and what's important to note here is that you can't arbitrarily raise these fees to raise revenues. These fees have to remain as a fee to cover administrative costs, and anything above that, it becomes a tax. So some limitations there to our fees. Other local sources, a major revenue source is, these are fees that are created by either state or an agreement, and this is automobile registrations, birth, death, marriage licenses, police outside detail, ambulance, and so forth. And then another major, one of our major revenue sources is school tuition, and that revenue is for tuition generated by students coming from Greenland, Newcastle, Newington, and Rye. It's going to talk about some state revenues, or state revenues that we used to have, or state revenues that we do have. There are four major state revenues that we were accustomed to back in 2009, the shared revenue, which no longer exists, was a redistribution of revenues to municipalities. And back in the late 90s, when they implemented the statewide property tax, we lost about $400,000 at that time. And now that revenue is now gone for FY10 and FY11, and that's $657,000 there. The transition aid was implemented last year, which was created to lessen the impact for the changes in the statewide property tax calculation. We were supposed to receive this revenue for 2 fiscal years, but this also disappeared in FY10, which remains 2 revenue sources from the state. Meals and rooms tax is total revenues collected by the state, by hotels and restaurants throughout the state, and it's redistributed to municipalities, but basically based on a formula based off our population for our community. And this distribution, the RSA had stated that they were trying to increase this revenue to municipalities gradually over several years to reach about a 40% to be distributed and 60% to remain with the state. However, we're starting to see that kind of decline a little bit, although we don't anticipate that our dollar amount revenue will decrease, but our percentage of total revenues by the state is now 26% being distributed and 74% remaining with the state. Our highway block grant is distributions of all of our tolls collected by the state, and the state is to not redistribute less than 12% to all municipalities. And again, this is based off of population for each municipality and the types of roads that we have. So the total loss that we've seen from fiscal year 08 for 3 years is over $540,000 loss in revenue there. Our other major revenue sources, motor vehicle registrations, and investment income and school tuition as our major revenues here. What this chart demonstrates is a comparison between the number of registrations that we do for motor vehicle and the revenue that we collect for motor vehicle. Now, the registration fees are set by the state. It's called a mill rate. The older your car is, or the type of vehicle, the less expensive it is going to be to register your car. If you notice, if you go out and buy a brand new car, it can be quite costly to register. And what this chart has shown or demonstrates that in the last few years, we've seen an increase in registrations, but a decrease in revenues, meaning people are hanging on to older vehicles. They're not going out and buying brand new vehicles. They may be buying pre-owned vehicles. So since 2008, we've lost about $400,000 in revenues there. We've taken a major hit on investment income. And we had estimated in FY11 about $450,000, but we're not even sure if we're going to meet that estimate this year. The interest rates are declining. Back in 2007, we were seeing interest rates of about 4%. I do the best I can to get out there for long-term investments at CDs, but we are limited to the type of investments that we can do as a municipality. So since 2008, we've seen a loss of close to $700,000. On a good note, we've seen some increase in revenues on the school tuition side, and we did have a increase back in FY10. We had budgeted about $4.6 million, but we had a new agreement that was written, and an increase in students, so we're budgeting $5.4 million for FY11. We don't anticipate that this is going to increase for FY12. Now, although this is not a revenue, it is a major obligation for the city, is our county tax, which continues to increase. And since 2008, we've seen an increase of over $600,000, or 17%. We're anticipating an increase again next year in fiscal year 12, although they're going through their budget process in February, I believe. They start in February. And this is one of those obligations that during our budget process, we really have to kind of estimate what that county tax is. That rate really is not established until I set the tax rate, which is in October, which is after the budget has been set. So in a combination of these major revenues, going back from FY08, we've seen a net change between the state revenues, the motor vehicles, investment incomes, taking in effect the increase for school revenues, but also an increase in the county tax. So we're seeing a net change of $1.4 million over the last 3 years. Moving forward to FY12, we did some estimates for our revenue sources, and again, this could change as we look at our revenue trends a little bit more carefully before we get into the actual budget process and you receive your budget document. But we do anticipate some continuing decline in investment income. If you note that last line, the use of fund balance of the indoor pool, during the budget process, we increased expenditures for the indoor pool of $155,000. We took from fund balance $155,000. So that's going to be a net zero, because you're going to have a decrease in your expenditure side by the same amount. So that won't have an effect on the tax rate. But overall, we're seeing or anticipating at this time a loss of revenue of over $100,000. Moving on to the expenditure side, salaries and benefits are some of the contracts that have been negotiated are based off of a rolling 10-year average of the CPI, and we use the November to November Boston, Brockton, Nashua CPI factor, and that last FY12 there, as you can see, I plugged in the number 1.5%, which is actually the October to October Northeast Urban Region CPI, but we're just using that as a factor to what we're going to be kind of forecasting. This rate will actually come out on Wednesday. We'll have the November to November rate. But in addition to that, even though we may have some contracts that haven't been fully negotiated, we still honor the step increases within each of the departments. And as you can see, the police department has about 65% of the staff will see a step increase. The school, on the teacher's side, 38%. All others, clerical, custodians, other staff, 14% will be receiving a step increase. On the fire side, about 20% of employees, and on the municipal side, 26%. Now, going forward to our health insurance, we established a health insurance stabilization fund many years ago, and how this stabilization fund worked is that we would take the average of the last 10 years of the increase that's set forth by the health trust and have each department increase their budget for health insurance by that amount. This year, we've received the guaranteed maximum rate of 12.5% increase on our premiums. The average of the 10 years would be 9.55%. And we have had some discussions, the city manager and myself had some discussions about the health insurance, and you want to talk?
Sure, we'll talk about that. Because this is an area that I think is, as we get through as we're going forward for planning for the departments, Judy and I have been talking about the stabilization fund. The stabilization fund now has about $6.9 million in it. A major increase in that stabilization fund was from a federal program that we were able to utilize where we were getting reimbursement for people that stayed on our drug program after they retired, and so the federal government did do certain reimbursements, and I believe that was we got about $750,000 over the period of time. So that has helped our stabilization fund. One of the things that we're talking about, if you look at the chart on the bottom of the sheet, you can see that with a 9.55% increase, you can see the increases for each of the departments. What we would propose from the outset to try to stabilize some of the budgets is to use a 5% number, and that number would, you can see the new budget items for each of the departments, so there would be savings for those departments as you go forward. So we wanted to just bring that out. We did talk about this with the City Council at the retreat. There appeared to be a consensus among the City Council that we felt pretty good about the size of the stabilization fund and our ability to use some of those funds to offset some of the costs for the other departments. So that's where we're at on that area. Moving on to the next area, which is an area that I think each department needs to be aware of, the increases for the retirement rates. Municipal employees will be going from 9.16% to 11.09%. Teachers from 8.02% to 9.07%. Group 2, police will be going from 14.63% to 16.62%, and fire from 18.52% to 20.08%. Those are some of the major areas of expenditures that we have identified. At this time, are there any questions relative to any of the things that Judy has presented, or any comments regarding anything to this point?
Tony?
A question about the inflation. Question about the inflation numbers, the November to November.
Yeah.
Is that the average over the year of November to November, or are those specifically the November values?
It's the November value. They compare from last November to the current November. So that's the index that they use on the state.
So it's not averaging it over a year.
No.
So what if, I haven't studied the inflation rate over time. What if there's something about our economy that every end of year the economy kind of ticks up due to the holidays and stuff like that? Are we always grabbing a higher?
It comes out every 2 months, from my understanding. And so because of the contract negotiations, we picked the November to November, getting close to the budget time. But so it does come out every 2 months that they post it.
So you could either go with September, or you could go to November. Those type, you could change it if you want to within the negotiations. But that number, that was the idea. The original idea of it was it would that you would have that number prior to getting deep into developing the budget. Everything that we've done over the last few years has been trying to get the best information to departments ahead of time, such as, with the stabilization fund for insurances, for the rolling average, to have that number in this, because the number for November to November is available, as Judy said earlier, probably this Wednesday, so it's the middle of December. So many departments would have to get started on their budgets. So because of it's such a large portion of everybody's budget, the cost of living within police, fire, schools, municipal, it was felt when they chose that number, that would be the most, that would be the best time frame to have. It would be November of 2000, for example, 2010 back to 2009. That was the way that was developed.
It seems strange we wouldn't use a year average rather than just picking a date to go after.
Well, as I said, let me just.
I understand what it's.
I'm just trying to understand. I'm just letting you know what the history of it was. The history was to have that number available because many of the departments are going to be within the next few weeks getting into their budget process. That was the history of how that was developed.
Okay, Councilor Smith, then Councilor Dwyer.
Thank you. Just a quick one on our fees. I know you have to be able to have the fees to actually go to administrative costs, otherwise it becomes taxes. Are we allowed to add fees and tie them in, and increase to them to CPI?
I would say you probably could. You could probably make the case that all our other costs are increasing by that, and those fees can go up probably that amount. The test would have to be is if you raise so much money off of a certain fee that you couldn't justify the administrative costs. But if you did CPI, I think you could rationalize that because many of our contracts and other things are set to the CPI, that it would be legitimate to do that.
Maybe that's something that the fees committee could look into this year.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councilor Dwyer.
I just wanted to clarify what Tony was asking, because I believe I have asked that before, and I believe I understood the answer to be different. So you are really saying it is just the October-November date that's compared to the October-November date, not the every 2 months going back?
It is every 2 months going back.
Okay.
November to November. So you go
That's
back
what I thought.
from November 2010 back to November 2009.
That averaging for all the
Right.
figures that you would get in that year. That's what I understand.
Right.
All the
Yes,
figures
that's
you
what
It's
I
a calculation that we're given by the federal government. Basically, you make a calculation from one year to the other, and that's how you come up with
Yeah,
that number.
okay.
Mitch.
I have just a quick, maybe a quick abridged civics lesson. If you could explain to us who sets the county tax, who votes on the county tax, and who
Sure.
people can complain to about the county tax.
Okay. Relative to the county tax, the county tax is set, there is a board of commissioners. They're a 3-member board. Their legislative body is our state legislators within the county district, so that all state legislators that serve from the state house basically serve as the legislative body for the county. The administrative body, as I indicated, are 3 commissioners. For the past few years, we've attended. There have been a couple council members. I know Councilor Kennedy has attended, and other council members have attended along. And I'm probably one of the only city attendees for the county. But they do have a public hearing. They have a public hearing process, and we'll make sure that that information gets out when we get it. But it is voted on by the county delegation, which is, like I said, is in the case of Portsmouth, we have 7 representatives on the county delegation. And then there's an executive group from that delegation as well. So the budget is proposed by the commissioners, and then the legislative delegation then proceeds to review that. They hold a public hearing, and then they vote on it. And the county tax is based on, just like the statewide property tax, on equalized value. So we are the highest paying percentage within the county because of our equalized value. So we pay the most out of all the county communities, and it's equalized. Okay?
Tom. Further questions, comments?
I understand the story how we got to a 10-year COLA rolling average, but is it continuing? Do we do any analysis to see that it's actually working? Knowing from the standpoint of, you have an artificially high COLA during times of most need, and then you actually have a lower than average COLA potentially at times when you might be a little bit more flush. So, in a time when our budgets are most constrained, we have a higher COLA than is actually there. So, do we do a comparison and see where we?
Well, we would each department that would have collective bargaining agreements, such as the school department, police department, and fire department, would discuss that with the negotiator and make their own determination through the process. What has come out with that there has been multiple contracts that have been settled based on the 10-year rolling average right now.
Right.
So until we get out of this negotiating cycle, unless something changes, then probably we'll see that continue. And then the next set of negotiations probably try to evaluate that to determine, it's almost like getting out of the, to change in the midstream as the inflation starts to increase, possibly in the next few years. Those might be pretty much very advantageous to have because we're going to be at the low end at that particular point.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's just
I mean, all I'm saying is that at some point, the school department, through its negotiation process, the police department, fire department, working with the city council, will determine within any new negotiations, an analysis on that.
right.
Further questions and comments on this portion of the presentation? Assistant Mayor.
What do we get for the county tax?
What do we get?
Service?
Services, is that what you mean?
Yeah, like what services?
Well, we send prisoners and we get
The nursing home. There's, with county government in New Hampshire is really the ability of the state to have certain services that typically in other states would be handled by state government. In many instances, the county handles those things such as nursing homes, jails, and the like. As like anything else, we provide for the county and participate as a community, as part of the entire county community.
Further questions or comments on this portion? Questions about how things work?
Moving on to the guidelines, and I'll turn it over to the mayor.
Thank you. Before you in the projection that you have in terms of the memorandum that you have in front of you, the City Council voted recently. We had a retreat, and we voted to proceed with what we will seek to be as a no tax increase, no budget increase, budget for the purpose of the budget being brought to us by the city manager. So if you look at that slide, and you'll note municipal is $15,444,000 and so forth, different numbers there. Those are the numbers that were in there last year. So what we're requesting is that the city manager present us with a budget with input from the departments that hit the same number as last year. Our goal being, again, zero budget increase, zero tax increase. Now, let me be also clear. This is the outset of the process. So, just like last year, we set some objectives. In this case, the City Council voted on these and made sure that they were provided to you, and they are what you see there. And we'll gladly certainly answer any questions on what that might mean. Although what it does mean is municipal was $15,444,000, et cetera, last year. Police was $8,438,000. Fire and school, as you see, and we're looking to hit those numbers again, in case that is in any way confusing. Now, the city manager has also offered and has already done as part of his presentation, talked about some additional changes that might be made. He can address a few that are up there so that we can see what kind of pressure we can take off under the circumstances. But just let me add procedurally, again, the council had some discussion on this at our retreat, and that is why you have the memorandum that you have in front of you. City councilors may seek to reduce the budget once we get to the end of the presentations and understand the impacts and so forth. So it does not mean that this is where we're necessarily going to end up. There may be councilors who want to bring it down lower, and we may have that kind of change. The city manager has made some additional modifications he'd like to discuss.
Well, yes, as many of you know, not only is there operating budget, but there is the non-operating side of the budget. And the non-operating side of the budget is probably 21% of the entire budget. So a couple areas that we're talking about is rolling stock, which is the replacement of vehicles and the like, trucks. Over the last 14 budgets, we have fully funded our rolling stock replacement program. This year was an opportunity for us to take probably a break from that and to be able to save some money. There really were two major pieces of equipment that we were looking at this year that we can push off to next year, and those were the trash compactors, and also there was an ambulance that we're going to be pushing off. It didn't affect substantially other areas. There are some areas, such as the police department, we're going to be able to buy some cruisers in advance. I know the chief has been working with the city the finance department relative to that. The Ford package, actually, for their vehicles will be no longer made. So we're going to try to catch that last cycle this spring. Capital was felt that we would like to stay at $1 million. We didn't want to go below that. That's about $187,000 below last year's level. We did meet with the subcommittee of the planning board, and we spent a whole day going through capital, and we believe we are able to make a recommendation to the city council through the budget process that the $1 million will hit many of the major areas that we need to hit, and there are areas that we will be delaying, but we believe confident that we're not letting anything go of any substantial nature. The next, the no new bonding resolutions for general fund only, that does not affect what's already there, such as the middle school. We certainly will be bonding. Anything that's authorized but unissued, we will issue. This means that no new general fund projects for next year. What we had to do, we had to recalibrate a number of our projects because we were bumping up against that 10% number that I always refer to as it relates to the percentage of operating and budget, and as opposed to what we put in for our debt service retirement. So we wanted to make sure that we're able to reconfigure that, and we have, and we worked again with the subcommittee of the planning board, and we're able to come up with a plan that everybody seemed comfortable with. So those are areas, and again, we feel strongly about using some of that, not on this particular, but to help departments to use some of the health insurance reserve to mitigate any impacts to budgets.
Let me just add one other item with respect to that, and the budget numbers that you see there, for the benefit of the press, in case they missed it during the last set of discussions that were in the public eye. Last year, this budget that you see here, which was a very small tax increase, resulted in a reduction of force of 24 people. So that's what we got with those numbers last time. Now we have the increases that we have, and that's what creates the obvious tension in the budget. So, discussion. Rebecca. Couldn't tell if it was you or Carol.
Yes. I have a question. So, if the city takes in revenue $86 million, that's everything that we take in, and then we have the $1 million for the capital outlay plan. We have the operating budget, municipal, fire, police, and school, which is about $67 million. There's $17 million difference.
Right, and that's...
Where does that go?
Okay, but a slide probably would have been useful on that, but it's in, let me just go through it again. The operating budgets are $68.5 million. The non-operating budgets are $17.7 million. So for example, debt service, county, contingency, those things that you see in your budget, the non-operating items that are below, we call them below the line. When you look at your budget book, you'll see a page with a summary on it, and you'll have all the operating with municipal, police, fire, and schools, and you'll have the total on it for those. Then you go down further, and you'll see debt service, you'll see tax anticipation notes, you'll see overlay, you'll see probably the county and those types of things, contingency. So that's what makes it. It's a good question.
Okay.
And we had a slide, but we took it out basically because we just wanted to condense the presentation, but probably should have left it in.
Okay, thank you. So it really is
Yes, so as I said,
all the money out.
79% of the budget is operating, and the remaining 21% is non-operating. And one of the reasons we didn't show it is because the non-operating really is very difficult to change, specifically debt service, which is the largest part of our non-operating. So it's a commitment that we have and we have to continue with. But it is a good question, and $17.7 million is non-operating, and $68.5 million is operating.
Okay, thank you.
Good question.
Ken Smith.
Thank you. Along those same lines, are we retiring any of our debt service coming up to actually be able to lower that amount to any others?
No, what has happened, we have the number if you want to take a look at it, but what has happened is what we try to do, Counselor, is working with the Finance Department and the Capital Committee is to take a look when we have debt falling off, we try to replace it. So, for example, we have debt falling off in certain areas, but we've replaced it with debt such as the middle school debt. So we try to time it so that when we have debt fall off, we try to replace that debt so that we don't have major spikes going on.
But don't we also have for instance, the parking garage should be retiring?
But that's not in the general fund, Counselor. If you recall, that's in our special revenue fund. And so we did replace that with an estimate for a new parking garage.
Probably wouldn't hurt for them to hear, given that you understand well the stabilization fund and how things are set up, if the city manager could just briefly explain the parking, the revenue fund, and special revenue fund, and how that works.
Well,
because if you hear about parking, you're going to say, well, how did that, work with what we heard the other night?
the city has other funds other than the general fund. The general fund is, as you see before you, is a fund that handles most of our expenditures within the city, the $86.3 million. We have other funds outside the general fund, and one of those funds is water fund, sewer fund, and we have a special revenue fund for parking. And the special revenue for parking, about 10 years ago, what happened was many of the parking functions were sprinkled within the various departments in the general fund of the budget. The city council at that time, working with the city staff, started removing those from the various departments. For example, the parking enforcement officers were under the direction of the police commission and were in the police department's budget. So we took that out. Public Works had many of those different expenses. So looking at state law, we felt it probably would be better to take, because we were deriving revenues, a large amount of revenue from parking, we thought it would be better to take those actual expenses that were related to parking and put them in a special revenue fund. So what we've done is we've put the cost of the enforcement, the maintenance of the garage, the maintenance of the meters, et cetera, in a special revenue fund. This year we put the crossing guards in that fund as well. So we have that in the fund, and the money that is derived from parking meters, from fines and fees, and also from the parking garage goes into that fund. Anything that is over and above what is needed for that fund goes into the general fund as a revenue to offset the local tax rate. Now, there will be over the next couple of years a conversation with the city council relative to what we call an enterprise fund. An enterprise fund would then dedicate those funds specifically, all those funds specifically for parking. Right now we have two enterprise funds that we have. We have the water fund and we have the sewer fund. And those funds are dedicated specifically for those purposes, and fees are raised from the ratepayers for the payment of those services.
Thank you, John. Further comments and questions, discussion? Anyone have any comments, questions, or discussion? Kent LePage.
John, I need an understanding. If we go to your current slide that you're on, and you have the zero operating budget increase, and then if I flip back to the slide 16, which
Kent, can you let's get a mic in front of you. So, yeah.
Sorry about that. Again, if we start on the slide that we're looking at, and then we flip back to slide 16, there's a differential of a negative of basically $1.5 million to get to a zero budget. Where and how is that going to be absorbed with when you come to zero, you can't be zero if you have a negative to start off with. You're starting off with a negative 1.5 million.
Let me just say that first, the slide you're looking at, that, maybe go back to 16, Judy, why don't you find that? And then the slide you just referenced is one is an expenditure side of the budget, the other is a revenue side of the budget. This is illustrative only. This is from fiscal '08 on the loss of revenue from then. So it's not in any one particular fiscal year. This is an accumulation. The intent of this slide and the slides that preceded it were to give you a history of what was happening to the revenue side of the budget, the deterioration in terms of loss of revenues for motor vehicle, state aid, those types of things. This is a cumulative loss of revenue from that of $1.4 million, which is probably 40 cents on the rate if you calculated it. Going forward to the slide that you just alluded to, that is the expenditure side of the budget for fiscal year 10. Those are the numbers that are in fiscal year 11. Those are the numbers that are in fiscal year 11, and those are the numbers that the City Council asked be submitted for fiscal year 12.
And again, I understand that, but from my understanding is the council really would wish to see an increase on the tax dollars over the next year, and to not have a tax increase even with those trended losses from '08 that was well done from Judy. It still means there is let's just call it rounded off to $1.5 million differential there, that somewhere with that, if you were to get to zero, you can't, you're already below the line.
Sure. I think that's probably an accurate statement. That is a challenge. And a couple other things that I think that hopefully with some of the new development that we have, we'll be able to add to the, new tax list. I'm not talking about revaluation, I'm talking about new value over and above what exists for next year.
Okay.
So hopefully there'll be some there. I'm not saying there's a silver bullet out there, but we do have the expansion to the hospital. We do have the new rehab hospital out at Pease. So we have a few things that we hopefully will have new value on. But you are correct. We've lost about $1.5 million in revenue over the last few years, and we have the county tax increasing. So more and more pressures are coming on the city budgets. It's something that we said last year and the year before. I think I said in last year's budget presentation. That budget was more about the revenue side of the budget than the expenditure side of the budget because of the loss in revenue that put more pressure on the tax rate.
And I use this as an example, is that, this is the big picture, is that when we get down to the different departments, we have a growing increase of loss of revenue to the city by our expenditure to outsourced special education issues that we have to either by court placements and or what's best for a student. So we start off with zero, but our zero is not equal to zero, and I think the public has to realize the challenge that we have. We're obligated towards certain things by both federal and state statute that says we must find the best educational purpose. And I just use that as an example. So those are the struggles. Zero never equals zero. It's either got to be above because, you got maybe extra income coming, like you said there might be, and or in the school side, tuition may go up, or we may get an increase of some tuition. That would be nice. But I think it's more realistic that our expenditures are going to be higher. And I'll just say, certain special education obligations for out-of-district tuition students is in a fairly fast increase. So, just a point of reference. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comments and discussion? Carol Chelman.
Yes, thank you. I should probably know the answer to this question, but if you would help me, John, when the school department brings in revenue, why is it that does not come off the school department budget? Why is it kept separate? You know what I mean? When we bring in revenue,
right?
I would think that would reflect in our budget, that we brought the revenue in.
It's like any budget. When you develop a budget, you have a revenue side of the budget and you have an expenditure side of the budget. Revenues have to equal expenditures to have your balanced budget, such as there are multiple revenues outside the property tax. Property tax is approximately, almost 78% of the entire budget. So, hypothetically, 78% of the school budget is funded through local taxes, which is pretty much standard in this state. The remaining amount of money is from different revenue sources, and so we put all revenues together as one source, and we list them all, and basically that's how we basically approach it. Now, you could almost, you don't want to specifically say if a revenue increases, we're going to increase dollar for dollar. You may give that weight, but on the other hand, if the statewide property tax comes back and we have to send $1.7 million to the state, you don't want that coming off the school budget either. So that's why we try to, we put revenues, expenditures. So the revenue side, I think that as over the years, you've seen some increases from the revenues for tuition, and I think there's been some recognition that there are certain areas that you want to maintain your programming because of that. Well, that's a legitimate policy discussion. But to say that you should go dollar for dollar, it can work both ways.
Okay, thank you.
Esther.
I'd also like to respond to that. Some of the revenues under law can't go back, they can only go back to the community. They can't go directly back to the school, like your CAT aid and your Medicaid revenues.
Further discussion and comments? Points of inquiry? Chief.
I could let a whole meeting go by and not say anything.
But expect no less.
I'm gonna. Just to make sure I heard you right, Mayor, it's great to get clear guidelines, and I just want to make sure they're clear. You stated that the council took a vote on 0% budget, no tax increase. Does that mean that's the goal that we should shoot for? I mean, last year we had a discussion of whether or not it was a mandate. My question is this going to be 0%, we meet it, and then there's some councils that still want more, or is the entire council in agreement that 0% is good enough?
As I said at the beginning of the discussion, and which I will say again, first of all, this is not a discussion about, what the meaning of is. There is a number for fire, $6,722,490. The city council voted to say that as a goal to have, if we go back to our procedure, the city manager brings us a budget, departments have input into that. We requested as a city council via this memo of November 30, by virtue of our discussion at our retreat, that we want people to come back, we would like the city manager to come back with budgets that reflect those same numbers that were there for you last year. Again, they're before you, $6,722,490 is fire. Now, what we ask the city manager to come back to with us for a budget begins the process. Then we go through the process that we have always gone through and hear the departments present upon impacts. We inquire. Councilors may wish to vote for less, conceivably more, perhaps not in this economy and world, but it's possible. But some councilors may advocate for a position of, let's say, 5% lower than that number that is being brought forward. I can't predict what that will be. Our process does not require us to say at the outset of the process what the end will be, and that's not what we're doing. However, we did ask the city manager, in accordance with his responsibilities under the charter, to bring to us a zero tax increase, zero budget increase budget for our consideration and for our joint work process with all the departments.
Thank you.
Further questions and discussion? Any takers? Bob Lister.
I'd just like to follow up with the chief. Being in a similar position in the past, I think it would be important to give the department heads a definitive area that they have to come back to. And if we're looking at no increase in taxes in the budget, certainly there are going to be some sacrifices in this whole process. But I think with the amount of work that the department heads put into preparing things for the city manager and coming to the city council, I have to tell you, I would be very disappointed if after we get to a certain point that we start talking about cutting more and more and more. Just a comment.
Useful for everyone to hear what people have to say. Dick.
Thank you for that. And the problem that it seems to exist is last year, I think I asked the question of mandate. Tonight, I did hear the word mandate coming from somebody down here.
Well, we voted on it, so we would term it a vote of the council to offer this to you.
Fine. Then let me just bring forth one other statement. The fire department, through the hard work of the chief and admin, has come zero twice. And that statement was made to you at this meeting twice. Prior to anything else, we'll find a way to get there. Others were not able to do that. And I think that's what aggravates this gentleman when he says, I'm at zero. I did what they were asked. And now maybe they want some more. And we're trying to find out if it's going to be hard. You notice I didn't say much because zero is going to be very hard. Matter of fact, it's cold out there tonight. So I think I'd like to know if we can get a little closer, a consensus from you, ladies and gentlemen. How close are you to thinking that zero is probably a good number?
Well, I think that our action, vote, and memoranda speak for itself, and it says, and I'd be happy to read the numbers to you again, and say that they are the result of a vote of the City Council, that municipal, we would like to see come in through the city manager at 15 million.
You don't have to read what I can read.
I know.
I guess what I'm saying to you is, I have seen other things happen. And I would hope to think that if that was a consensus, as you are bringing forward, the word, and a word mandate as you want to bring forward.
If you like it.
If that could be the pot that we stick with and try and stay there. Trying to come in at 2% under or even 1% over is going to be difficult. And we were at 0-0. 08, 09, excuse me, 09, 010. So it's really hurting us harder than everybody else.
Appreciate your comments, as always.
And I'll shut up.
It's quite all right. That's why we're here. This is an open forum in a democratic country. Councilor Coviello.
Thank you. And I don't know if there's an attempt to rewrite history, but a year ago, we asked for a minus 4% cut, and no one got that.
I don't remember that.
Further discussion and commentary. Well, I'm going to talk a little slowly just in case someone has the urge to put something else out there. Once again, I always appreciate...
You're getting paid by the hour again.
Pardon me?
You're getting paid by the hour again.
Yeah, it ain't much. I would like to thank everyone for coming this evening, and I would also like to thank everyone for the diligence and hard work that was put in last year through this budget process. We do not, any of us, take for granted what a difficult time it can be when the money is leaving the system. And this year, at least the positive I see is that we've been through a year of difficulty and we understand better what it's like to operate under those circumstances. So I do appreciate the civility and the grace with which everyone conducted themselves last year, and I certainly hope going forward we can continue with that model to do the best we can with what we have. Any other comments? And if not, we'll close the meeting, and we have our schedules. Department heads and everyone, please remember, if those schedules don't work for you, you want to get in touch with the city manager's office so that we can make sure that we accommodate people as we should. Thank you very much, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.